Hi guys, today we'll create how to use Kafka using ChatGPT. How to create a Kafka messaging applications using ChatGPT. So I'm searching here how to use Kafka in microservices using a Spring Boot, a step-by-step code I need through the ChatGPT. So I searched this one, and then it's a high level guide which they provide ChatGPT how to use Kafka in Spring Boot using microservices and all. So first we have these all are the steps which we need to follow, like create a Kafka producers, Kafka consumer, and then so these all are the steps which they have given, how to use Kafka in microservices using a Spring Boot step by step. So first what we have to do, first set up the Kafka cluster in our local machine server. Then we have to create a Spring Boot project. There we need to add the dependency if you are using Maven or Gradle. Create a Kafka topic by running of the following command in Kafka bin directory. So you can go for the Kafka where you install the Kafka, there inside the bin Kafka topic .sh and create a topic with your topic name, and that will be the bootstrap server localhost 9090. So that you can copy from here and then start your this, and after that you will mention in a Spring Boot configuration Kafka property by using application YAML. So there in application YAML you have to mention the localhost which you started 9092 here, and then Kafka consumer group and your ID, and then create a Kafka producers to publish this message to the particular topic. So you need to create a Kafka producers where we have to auto wire the Kafka template, and then based on that you have to send the data. So whatever the messages you are getting through the topic, then you have to send the data to the Kafka template. So the Kafka template will send this message, and then we'll have a consumer which will consume the message. So by using Kafka listeners at the rate Kafka listeners will listen this topic name based on the group ID, and that there we have to listen the message. Use the producers and consumer in microservice to exchange the message over Kafka. We used producer and consumer in Kafka cluster to exchange the messaging. So if producer has sent the data, then consumer will consume the data and they will process, and once he will process, then they will send it to the cluster will send it to the, and then others producers which they have produced the data, and that consumer also will be there, so that they will consume the latest data and update like that. Now I want to check how to create a Spring Boot application using Kafka. So see what type of things will be there. Like here they are creating step by step informations, like if you want to use a Kafka, then what are the steps you need to follow in a Spring Boot application. So before we check like how to use Kafka, so what are the things need to be started, what need to be download, and then how to call producers and consumer. Now here we are checking step by step all the code which need to be called in a Spring Boot to use a Kafka. So ChatGPT automatically that will be generated. If you want, you can take as a reference and modify your changes. If your respective project or requirement will be the same, then you can use the same as per the changes you can modify. So see, like there are multiple steps which has been generated by this ChatGPT for the Kafka using Spring Boot applications. So we'll see once this generations will complete, then we'll go each step by step. So yeah, so that is completed. Now we can go for step by step. So what happened here? Like first of all, we have to set up the Kafka cluster. So we already done this before. Now add the dependency that also we added in this form.xml. We added already Kafka topic by using Kafka bin directory, that also we already done, and added the Kafka property which you have configured port number, group ID, consumer ID and all. Then create a publishers to publish, that we already done, and then create a consumer which consume, that also we have done. Now we have to go for step by step use a Kafka using a Spring Boot. So first create a new Spring Boot project using any type of IDE or using a Spring initializers. So once you will go for that, then add these all the following dependencies. Like if you used Gradle or if you use Maven, you can use these all or the dependencies. Like a Spring Starter Web, a Spring Starter Test, and a Spring Kafka is required. Suppose if you want to use Kafka, then a Spring Kafka is required. So these all are the dependency is required. Once you create it, then create a Kafka configuration. So that configurations will have a @configuration annotations @enable Kafka. Inside that we'll have a @value where we can check bootstrap server which you have defined in application.property, so that will be configured, and the value will be called from this application.yaml. So that bootstrap.property you have defined here, and that beans will be there. So that beans have a producer which will take the data based on the topic, they will produce to the Kafka cluster. So how they will produce? So these all are the steps will be there. Through that consumer config group config properties, based on that this will be produce the data. So we need a bootstrap server, Kafka template, and the consumer factory. So this is for this configuration class which need to be defined. After that we'll have a producer class. So create a producer class which will be generate or send the data. If any consumer want, he can take the data. So based on the auto write, you need to auto wire this Kafka template, and then we'll have a post call. So that post call will send the data which we have created. So that data will be taken based on the Kafka template and send it to the based on the topic which will be sent the message. Also you can create a consumer class. So that consumer class will have a listener. Here in producer class we'll have a Kafka template need to be auto wire, but consumer class we need a auto wire @listener. So that based on this topic name which you have defined and group ID, through that it will be called. And start the Kafka server, run your Spring Boot application, use a REST client to send the message to the topic endpoint and verify that consumer has received or not. So how you will test? Based on that form.x XML, you already mentioned all the dependencies, so you have to create a REST client or have a postman. So through that postman you can send the data based on the topic endpoint and verify consumer is receiving or not. If consumer is receiving, then your task has completed. So this is just an overview like how to create a Kafka based applications or project using a Spring Boot. So if you want to go for this full implementations details and all, then you can obviously go for the Spring Kafka documentation for the detailed information. So these all are the steps to generate Kafka. So basically annotations, we need to check @enable Kafka, @configuration, @value, @bean, and @autowire, @post mapping, @Kafka listeners. These all are the annotations which is required to create a Kafka based on Spring Boot microservices. Yeah, that's it. So that we can generate Kafka application using chatbot.